Mr. Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shogan, when you were here last year, a number of senators asked you, including me, a series of questions about articles you'd written, public statements you had made on social media that were, I have to say, pretty grossly partisan, and I thought offensive, and you and I went back and forth about it. After that, a number of us asked you questions for the record relating to these statements. I want to follow up on one of them. I, in particular, asked you to give us a full accounting of the public posts that you had made on Twitter. You had locked your Twitter account before you came before this committee. It had previously been public. I asked you to provide the public posts that had previously been available on Twitter because the ones that we have were pretty disturbing. You responded as follows, and I quote, "My personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog," end quote. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
I just remind you you're under oath. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your Twitter posts then that I was asking you about. On February 18th, 2022, you posted on Twitter bemoaning the dropping of mask requirements for children, including those under the age of 5. Do you remember that post?
No, Senator. Those tweets were in my personal capacity.
No. I asked you, would you give all public posts that you had made on Twitter? You said no, effectively, and you said that your Twitter posts consisted of mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. And you just told me now under oath that you stood by that. So now let's talk about your Twitter posts. On February 18th, 2022, you posted bemoaning the fact that mask requirements for children under the age of 5, one of whom I happen to have, by the way, had been dropped. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams?
My social media is in my personal capacity,
Answer
Senator.
my question, please, because you've testified under oath that you only posted about your dog and sports teams and novels, and you also said you wouldn't give this committee any of your public posts. So, is your post on February 18th, 2022, bemoaning the lifting of mask requirements for children under the age of 5, who I might just ask, all of the data has said is extremely harmful to children, these mask requirements? We'll leave that aside for now. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams? Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
Yes or no, Ms. Shogan? You are under oath before this committee, and I have to say, you have placed this issue squarely in record by repeatedly refusing to answer. Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
So you're not answering my question. Let's talk about another post. 26th of May, 2022. You talk about an assault weapons ban, retweet a post, ban assault weapons now. Say you agree with this idea that you have to be a certain age to buy so-called assault weapons in America. Is that a post about sports teams or your dog or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post on January 5th of 2021 in which you say that Ted Cruz ought to stay in his own lane and not worry about what's going on in Pittsburgh? This is a reference, I think, to questions he had about the certification of the last election. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post, you remember December 10th, 2020, where you said that you were hoping that President Trump would have his vetoes overridden, and you agreed with the post that he was a weak policy president? Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
What about your post on January 5th, 2021, in which you speculated that President Trump would pardon himself next, participating in a conversation about the certification of the Electoral College? Is that a post about sports teams or mystery novels or your work at the White House Historical Association?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post? Do you remember this one? I said we seem to be having an incredible case of amnesia, but maybe you remember this one. This is from December 3rd of 2021, in which you advise an individual who goes by Meg on social media that the Library of Congress, you advise this person to complain about religious flags that have been planted on the grounds of the Library of Congress, and you say that they ought to be removed. And you go on to give this person advice about how to complain and have them removed. Do you remember that post?
My social media is in my personal
Do you remember the post?
capacity. My
Do
social
you remember
media is
the
in
post?
my personal capacity, Senator.
I have to say, I have been here for 4 years in the Senate. I have never seen a witness stonewall like this before. Never. And I've seen a lot. This is extraordinary. Do you remember this post? December 3rd, 2021.
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
I mean, this is unbelievable. And you want to be the archivist of the United States. You lied to us under oath. You lied to us in your QFRs. You just lied to me a second ago under oath. And now you're sitting here stonewalling, not answering questions about public posts that you've made. Are you a lawyer, Ms. Shogan?
No, Senator.
Are you familiar with the Shirtliff case at the United States Supreme Court?
No, Senator, I'm not.
Well, in that case, the Supreme Court held that, in fact, it constitutes viewpoint discrimination for a government entity to remove religious flags from its property when it's opened up the property to allow other people to put flags on it. Exactly the question that you were addressing in your public posts on Twitter. You're giving legal advice, which you're not qualified to give, directly contrary to the United States Supreme Court. I just wonder, does this have to do with your view that you wrote about that the religious right is connected to the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics? Is that why you said what you said about religious flags, that the religious right is a force for anti-intellectualism? Explain that to me.
No, Senator.
Do you stand by your comment that the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics?
Senator, that article was written. It was about how Republican presidents use common sense terminology to effectively communicate with Americans.
Yeah, in which you said that the religious right, the rise of the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics. I just point out that's the article in which you say anti-intellectual, the title is Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. Very nonpartisan. Dr. Shogan, I'm going to ask you again, will you give to this committee your public posts on Twitter? Will you make them available to this committee?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
Mr. Chairman, I have to tell you, this is the most extraordinary thing I have seen in my brief time in the Senate. I have never seen a witness blatantly lie under oath like Dr. Shogan has just done to this committee, stonewalled this committee, and just repeatedly refused to answer my questions about her own posts that are in public. For these reasons, I will oppose your nomination, and I strongly, strongly urge this committee to take action on this and force this witness to own up to the fact that she is misleading us right now before our eyes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Thanks. Shogun, Dr. Shogun, why don't you take a minute and just to respond to some of what we've heard from Senator Hawley, please? And I promise not to interrupt you.
Thank you, Senator. I would like to highlight my nonpartisan record that I have achieved for the past 15 years in service, in public service. 8 years at the Congressional Research Service, 4 years at the Library of Congress, and the past 3 years at the nonpartisan White House Historical Association. I have worked very effectively with Republicans and Democrats in all of these capacities. When I worked at the Congressional Research Service, I worked with hundreds of members of Congress and senators, committees, majority and minority alike, walked into offices, helped them get from point A to point B, regardless of their partisan affiliation. In my current job at the White House Historical Association, I came to the White House Historical Association. I accepted the position late 2019, started the job in early 2020, and when President Trump was the President of the United States, worked very effectively with that White House. And then, of course, now with President Biden in the White House, I've worked very effectively with that White House. So I stand very strongly behind my professional, nonpartisan record, which I think speaks for itself.
With the information we just heard from my colleague, is this official? Is this like government emails? What? I don't really understand the source of them. Just explain it.
No, that's social media in my personal capacity, as marked as such.
Okay. Be interesting to see what social media in our personal capacity look like for some of the folks that we serve with. Mm-hmm. And so I thank you for setting the record straight. I want to begin by thank you for joining us for today's hearing and for your willingness to serve our country. I'm a veteran, last Vietnam veteran serving here, especially appreciative of the work in that regard. But over the last decade, the National Archives and Records Administration has been putting together the tools to transition the federal government from paper to electronic records. And as the chief administrator of NARA, the archivist plays a critical leadership role in the transition, as you know, to digital records, and providing appropriate support to staff will be crucial in the success of the transition. Here's my question. With that said, what administrative or policy changes would you implement at NARA in order to ensure the agency has the appropriate resources to carry out this transition from paper to digital? And how will you ensure the staff has the support and training that they need to efficiently accomplish this feat?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. It is a very big challenge for NARA moving forward, the transition from predominantly analog to a predominantly digital archive. The first challenge, I think, Senator, will be that paper records aren't going anywhere. Paper records have existed since the beginning of the Republic. So as the transition moves to digital records after June 30th, 2024, when the OMB directive is implemented, the National Archives will still have to deal with paper records while they transition. So to use a sports analogy, if you're a good basketball player, you have to be able to play offense and defense. And the National Archives will have to be able to also serve paper records while they make the transition to digital. So that will be the first challenge. The second challenge, I think, Senator, will be that when those digital records come to the National Archives, the question will be, are the agencies providing the correct data that accompanies those records? Because as you might imagine, there's going to be an exponential increase in the number of digital records compared to analog or paper records. So what will really matter is that if the accompanying data with those records will help our users find the records that they need. So I think that's going to be a major challenge. Going forward, the archives, we will need to provide correct training for staff because just as I said before, the records have increased exponentially, but the budget has not increased exponentially. So staff needs to be trained to be able to make this transition from paper to digital, and there will be different requirements for things like metadata. And we can rely upon a very strategic use of training to be able to make sure staff are ready for that transition. And once again, being